A lot of publications have been doing their top 100 list. So HoopsHype did their top 100 players in the NBA. If you guys haven't seen it, definitely go check it out. Really good article by them. Now, we had two Detroit Pistons actually make the list. Tobias Harris came in at 90, and Cade Cunningham came in at 37. So, what is your reaction to both of those rankings?
I think Tobias is. I would say he's a top 100 player. I feel like 90 is a little harsh, but I would say yeah, he's absolutely a still like in my opinion, Tobias has become incredibly underrated as a player just because of the fact that like everyone has made a joke out of Tobias, right? Like the whole crumble cookie thing, the amount of hatred he got from Philadelphia 76ers fans in the last few years. And when you think about it, like he didn't really do anything to receive this hatred. He just didn't live up to the contract he was given, and that's not his fault. If you want to be mad at somebody, be mad at Daryl Morey for not trading him sooner, or be mad at it was Elton Brand before him.
I don't even know. I mean,
Be mad at the Philadelphia 76ers. Don't be mad at Tobias Harris, is my point. And I think he's someone who I think this year, and we talked about this as well. Like I think he's going to be someone that makes a kind of bounce back year, not necessarily even in terms of production, but just in terms of how he's viewed. So I think by the end of the year, going into next year, I think Tobias will be a little bit higher in this ranking. And then the same goes for Cade Cunningham. 34. If you told me in 2021, when the Pistons won the draft lottery, that Cade Cunningham would be ranked as the 34th best player in the NBA going into year 4, I would have thought something went wrong. And that's not to say being ranked 34th in the NBA is a bad thing. That's incredibly impressive, right? But Cade Cunningham is a guy who should be seen as like a top 15 player in the NBA. When you go number 1, especially in the class that he went, those are the expectations you're like placed on. The unfortunate part is that the Pistons have made him becoming this top 15 player in the NBA incredibly difficult ever since he has put on that hat. He has probably had the most adversity of any number 1 pick in recent memory in the NBA. I feel like his situation is almost comparable to that of like Bryce Young in Carolina. If there's any NFL fans out there, now granted he produced a lot better than Bryce Young has thus far in his career, but in terms of situation, I feel like that's really the only thing comparable right now. Just because I feel like he hasn't really been placed in a position where the team is prioritizing his development. It's interesting, and I feel like there was this overlap with Cade and Blake, where Blake kind of was put in this position when he was on the Detroit Pistons. Blake Griffin, when he was on the Pistons, he was put in this position as being the guy, right? And like whatever else the roster is, we'll just figure it out because we have the guy here. Blake's just going to like carry us once again to the playoffs like he used to. And I think that expectation was taken from Blake and then literal like 6-8 months later put on Cade Cunningham the minute he got here as like, okay, now you're the guy. The team is what the team is, but you know, you'll get us to the promised land. And I feel like that's been incredibly unfair to Cade, because I think he's someone who, if they had prioritized his development, I think this is truly like the best year to show this. And I think going into next season, I can't see why he isn't seen as a top 15 guy in the NBA. Because this year, like, not to say he has some type of God squad around him, but he has a team that fits his play style, and that a team that fits, you know, his development, a team that like he can kick it out to any player if this is done right on the court, and they can, you know, play their role correctly versus, you know, playing guys out of position and playing all bench lineups and all those other things that I've heard a million times. So I think these are two good rankings, and I would be surprised if Jalen Duren also by next year isn't in these discussions as well.
Yeah, if he's not, then something went horribly wrong this season. But I think the bias is more of a stain, to your point, of just like the underperforming in Philly, and that has more to do with the pieces like surrounding Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey more than it has to do with than Tobias. Because to your point, I think he's actually going to perform higher because there's no expectations on him competing and winning like a playoff series. I mean, if the Pistons make the playoffs, I will be the happiest individual right now. I'm sure you would be too. But I'm not expecting Tobias to come in and average 25 points and lead this team to the playoffs. I'm just expecting him to be a secondary option with Cade Cunningham, seeing how they can click, seeing how a power forward of his status does next to Cade. And, I think the ranking's fair. Now, being ranked 30th, I don't really think it's actually that bad considering the season they had.
No,
Because,
yeah.
someone could say, yeah, maybe he's a top 50 player. Like, maybe. But, some of these, journalists can be a little bit rough. I think if he gets to a top 25 player this season, then I think the Pistons made the plan. Like, if he can get to a top 25 status, um, it's telling me he may make the All-Star team. This team is going in the right direction. I think top 15, man, like if he's top 15, like I'm running through a brick wall. If he's top 15, I mean, he's kind of like seen in the same light as the guys that have next. And I did look, Scotty Barnes was actually ranked higher than Cade in this ranking by HoopsHype. So if you want to put, I know there's, Pistons fans that kind of still salty about rookie of the year stuff, but I mean, hey, that's not me at all.
Okay, do you think Tyrese Halliburton is a top 15 player in the NBA right now?
I do.
I can't see why Cade Cunningham can't be in that position. And that's me being a big Tyrese Halliburton fan. I think Cade's a better prospect. And I think he hasn't, and I don't think he should have been placed as a top 15 player. Let me make that completely clear. He should not have been placed as a top 15 player coming into the season. But going into his career, back in 2021 when he got drafted, I thought by now absolutely he would be, seen in those types of lights. And I can't blame him really for it because like I said, he's been in that type of position where he hasn't been in a position where Indiana is going out and, getting a team around him that really makes a lot of basketball sense. And they,
Yeah.
go out and go get an all-star level player like a Pascal Siakam, to play next to him. Or even in Sacramento, granted, that didn't work ultimately, but it was such a short period of time. He still did more winning in Sacramento than Cade Cunningham has at any point in his career thus far. So to me, I don't see why Cade can't be in those Halliburton discussions. Or even in my opinion, I can't see why maybe not going into next year, but eventually I don't know why I don't know why he can't be seen in the same light that Shea is,
I get what you're saying, like in terms of like a prospect, a player. Uh, I I agree with you. I just to your point, I'm agreeing with you as well. It's the roster construction and what the front office put around him because his rookie year, you're like, yeah, 20 wins. They should probably be a playoff team by now going into year 4, but that just was not the case. The rosters actually got worse somehow, which is it's such a head scratcher. Like the whole Troy Weaver era to me, I swear I could just do a podcast of where it went wrong and why it went wrong, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, I do agree with you. Like he has all the tools to be in that conversation as a Shea, being a top 15 player. I'm not really questioning his ability whatsoever. I just kind of question, previous regimes of how they've built around him. I don't really know what the master plan was, but it obviously failed.
Yeah, and that's putting it lightly. Failing, failing would be in my opinion, because it's just so interesting. I've been doing a lot of thinking of where the Pistons discourse was around draft time 2021 to where we are now. The Pistons were seen as the best young core in the NBA by a lot of people, and to now being seen as a joke by a lot of people is really sad, and it bothers me because I feel like this team had such a linear path towards being even at absolute worst where a Toronto is right now, or even obviously Orlando's been on this amazing trajectory last season, but I really saw the Pistons being in that position and it just hasn't worked out. So it's really interesting, we talk about regimes where Trajan is going to take this.
Yeah, I have more confidence in him, and I don't know if it's blind faith just because he says all the right things and he's really calculated. I hope he's the right man for the job, because I don't want to be, as a fan, making videos about, okay, who's going to be the next GM in 4 years? You know, like it's just a never ending cycle. Like one of these guys has to stick, build something, and have us fans actually like excited to talk about this team and find positives like each and every week. Because like doing a podcast all last year, man, like I was throwing shit at the wall hoping it stuck, and it didn't.